G'day yo, Greg Jones here, and I'm here to bring you Power Talk. You're going to learn how to penetrate those impregnable guards, and you're also going to learn when it's time to pull out of those dangerous entanglements. There are three types of bottom. Position 1, supine, reactive player begging for any type of engagement from the top. We approach this position, heavy lateral movement, penetrate, pull out, penetrate, pull out. They go into fatigue, either accept the pass or look to stand back up. Position 2, seated. For those that like to play inside position and seated wrestling. We need to approach these guards with good head height, looking to push them to the mat and secure body locks. Position 3, they've had enough of your dominating top pressure and they want to return to the feet. But we're not going to let them up until we're done. Be powerful in all positions. Don't just be a bottom. Let's take a look at how we approach guard passing. I think there's a problem with with the terminology, and that is guard passing. And I think people look at that like they have to enter a guard to pass it. So let me give you a demonstration of what I think. If I'm thinking about guard passing, it's basically we look at how to approach passing guard from the guard they have established. So we'd be like, all right, we want to pass De La Riva guard. Now we're in De La Riva guard, let's pass it. Or say, how do we pass reverse De La Riva? We want to basically be in reverse De La Riva to pass. It's the same thing with every guard. It's like, how do we pass butterfly guard? But really, the best strength we have here, the optimum situation would be, we didn't even enter a guard, right? So Tyler's on the bottom, I'm able to get around the legs, and I'm able to apply passing pressure so that we had no risk in this exchange. If we think about this too structurally, if I'm approaching Tyler in a supine position and I go to something like headquarters, at the end of the day, I'm still in De La Riva. I'm giving him something to basically engage from. I give him a guard, some form of guard, and he has some chance to attack out of here. But say I'm better at the position and I'm able to clear it and knee cut through. But obviously, best case scenario is Tyler doesn't establish any grip at all. Nothing. He gets no position where he has any chance of attack. We basically bypass him on bottom to get to the passing position. So I want you to think about approaching the bottom player from a framework of how can we give him nothing while still achieving our goal of passing. If in our heads we think, all right, this guy's good at De La Riva, I'm going to have to pass his De La Riva guard. We're giving him something he doesn't really deserve, something we don't have to give him. And I think this mistake comes from guys that come across from gi to no gi, which I think obviously it's now 2022, it's less and less of those guys exist, but that sort of idea still follows through the sport. Obviously, a lot of guys now just start no-gi and they become very proficient, high-level no-gi competitors. Whereas in my day, I obviously got my black belt in the gi and then had to really transition to no-gi. And at the time, no-gi was really sort of undeveloped to the same level of gi. And obviously there's been a ton of innovations since then. So I think the mistake is, back in the day, and I would make this mistake too, as the bottom guy, I would think of guard as I concede any sort of wrestling, any sort of takedown battle. I give up the bottom position and the guy on top has to engage. He has to engage. Obviously, in terms of sports entertainment, that'd be a great thing to happen. We both give up some sort of mutual risk. So if I was Tyler, I would pull guard and I'd basically lay flat like this. And I'd think, all right, the top guy's going to approach the guard. Maybe he enters reverse De La Riva. And we have a battle from here where if I was Tyler, I'd have a chance to invert, get off some attacks. Top guy would have a chance to clear grips and pass. Same thing from De La Riva here. And that's basically how historically gi guys would look at it, because in my mind, obviously toreandos can be easier in the gi because of the grips, right? But because of Spider Guard grips, to get a Toreando, I kind of have to, at least in some sense, give him access to my wrists. Whether or not he's able to get 2 feet inside, he can still, when I take a grip, he can establish grips back. Obviously in no-gi, if I grab the shins and Tyler grabs my wrists, he really has nothing here. Those wrist grips are nothing like hooking grips in Spider Guard. So I can basically approach this guard and use methods to get him moving or create angles without giving him any grips. And again, this can happen in the gi, but again, I have to give him something, right? He can take Spider Guard grips here. So again, I find in gi, historically, I would really always try to enter something like a headquarters position to establish upper body grips, pants grips, and pass out of here, knowing that if I just go for Toreandos, he can establish grips. So really, because he doesn't have that ability to take a grip of his own when I start looking for no-gi Toreandos, we can approach the guard and pass it while conceding nothing. We don't have to give the bottom guy anything. And I think that can be a mistake, and it's a mistake I've made and I've complained about in terms of a sporting context. You know what I mean? Again, sports entertainment, we want 2 guys to come out and both engage each other and both accept some form of risk to create an exciting match. And it's easy to say the bottom guy, the guy that pulls guard, he should be able to lay flat and wait for the top guy to approach his guard and have to basically concede something. But really, the top guy can, again, if he doesn't really care about having an exciting match, he can not engage the guard at all and still apply some form of meaningful pressure, right? So again, just broadly, he can stay outside of range where the bottom guy doesn't have any sort of attacks from him. He doesn't have to come in and try to find a headquarters position and start working out passes here where I've given up some sort of risk. I've given him something. I've put myself to a certain extent in a dangerous zone. I don't have to. So I think with this sort of product, I want to redefine how you approach the guard. There's nothing that says that you have to give them anything. I don't have to give Tyler a grip on my leg. I don't have to step into his guard to pass it. Ultimately, I want to be able to try to pass his guard without putting myself in any danger at all. But you have to remember, if I enter Tyler's guard and I enter a headquarters position, depending on skill level, I could enter that and pass his guard very quickly. If you're better than your training partners, you can do that. But if your training partners or your opponent, someone's super high level, super dangerous, and we enter that position, and ultimately we find out they're better from there, we've given them something to work with, where they could counter us, they could submit us, they could sweep us, they could do whatever from there. Ultimately, again, it could be a quicker means to pass the guard, but you also are risking something, and again, you don't guarantee that you'll pass. If we approach the guard and give this guy nothing, we can start to fatigue them. We can force them to react. Every time I take an advantageous angle, Tyler has to react to it. And as he does that, I still am not giving him anything. And I'm not saying this passing approach will be quick. In terms of a 5-6 minute match, it could be difficult to apply enough pressure to a dangerous guard to pass it. But 5, 10, 15 minutes as we build through time and we keep applying this methodology, the bottom guy is going to get fatigued. All you're doing, ultimately, when they're playing super, is staying at these angles here. And Tyler has to react. He either has to carry my weight or he starts to turn back in. We can stay out of range here. No matter who is on bottom here, we keep applying these principles, we're going to fatigue him. If Tyler chooses to stay on bottom and play this style of supine guard the entire time, eventually me pushing his legs away from his chest, him retracting his knees, trying to prevent the pass, perhaps even him applying bench press pressure frames to keep me from north-south or side control style passing. He is getting fatigued, and all I'm doing is walking. We can apply this pressure consistently and safely if we know how to stay out of danger. And ultimately, you will eventually wear them down to a point of passing them. Everyone's trained in the gym where they've rolled with a guy that's much better than them, but they're tired. And they've been able to get the better of that round to potentially do better than they would have expected to. So if we can attack a supine position within the framework of fatiguing that person before we let them engage in any sort of guard, we are going to fatigue them and we ultimately can pass. That leads us to what, generally speaking, happens next. If I keep applying this sort of pressure to Tyler and he keeps reacting, eventually he's going to want to sit up. He's going to change his range. And when he changes his range is, again, some of our best opportunities to start hitting guard passing attempts. So as Tyler sits up, there's opportunity for body locks. There's going to be opportunity for knee cuts. Again, those style of passing because he's vulnerable as he sits up. Why is he vulnerable? Because if you want to sit up from here to here, generally speaking, your legs extend and your arms extend. Hard to sit up, elbows and knees tight. So as they reach, we have opportunities that we wouldn't have if they were simply supine, keeping good protective posture here. So again, if we can fatigue the bottom guy enough that he wants to sit up, we have opportunities, right? We also have a third style of bottom position here. So the first two, Tyler's supine, playing this style. Second one, he's seated, playing this style. And the third style of bottom player, in my opinion, is a guy that doesn't want to be there anymore. Anyone that's tired doesn't want to be on bottom. When Tyler wants to get up, generally speaking, he'll take a frame. And again, there'll be more opportunities as he goes to stand up. So this is, if he gets tired, he wants to get up, get out of it. If he frames though, this is opportunities for me to start looking to take his back. Again, in a way, very little risk to me. So I want you to rethink the bottom player, right? There are 3 bottom positions we're going to approach in this instructional product. And they're not just guards, right? Tyler's in the supine, his back's flat. There's this position where he is reactive. He wants me to engage his guard, give him something, and we have some form of mutual exchange. There's the seated player. The seated player is basically, he can wrestle up. He can look for inside position to take single X, archie, different style of guard. A little less reactive, a little more active. If Tyler's on his back here, Tyler, unless he has an ability most of us don't have, he's stationary, stuck. He can basically look to turn to a hip. He can turn onto either hip, he can invert, but that's about the extent of his mobility. Those are reactive movements. If he's on his butt here, very easy for him to change angles, very hard for us to get an angular advantage, very easy for him to move forward and backwards. So he can be active. So again, just to visually represent that, Tyler's flat on his back. Very hard for Tyler to come closer to me here, to force action. He has to wait for me to engage the guard. When he's seated though, he can be a bit more active. He can move towards me easily. If I create an angle change, he can follow me. So a bit more of an active guard. But in my opinion, the third area, and this is the area of MMA fighters, wrestlers, they just want to get up. If, say we've landed maybe a takedown, a sweep, Tyler's landed on bottom, he just wants to get up immediately. He's had enough of this. And again, amongst the bottom player that wants to get up, I categorize it as an MMA fighter, a wrestler, or a Thai jiu-jitsu player. If we fatigued him enough, and he's frustrated enough, and he wants to get up, he'll still follow this principle. He'll go from flat to seated to standing. That'll be basically the process. And again, so in that sense, we have to approach all of these positions differently, but we can also turn any outside supine player here. If we apply the correct amount of pressure and we fatigue him enough, we can turn this guy into this guy, and ultimately this guy into the guy that doesn't want to be on bottom anymore. So again, this instructional is going to sort of redefine how we approach these positions, how we can use fatigue to beat the bottom man when the bottom man has an excellent, dangerous guard. how we can stay safe while attempting to land in dominant positions without necessarily have to being caught in a guard. So again, we're going to approach these three. Again, broadly, supine, seated, and lastly, the guy that doesn't want to be there anymore. All right, so we'll basically summarize what we just covered, but we'll sort of add a few more details as well, right? So let's remove thinking of the bottom guy as a guard player. And let's remove the idea that we have to end up in a guard. We can avoid those guards entirely. But let's talk about the three types of bottom player. Let's look at that basically broadly, and obviously ultimately there are different guards available to the bottom player that they could get. But again, we don't have to give them any type of guard at all. To me, the definition of a guard is a position that allows you to keep your opponent, the top player's weight off you while you have some form of attack, right? So again, a guard would be De La Riva. De La Riva done correctly, it's difficult for me to pressure, and there's attacks available to Tyler. Tyler could go K-guard style. There's numerous attacks from here, right? Tyler's on bottom now, but if I'm able to get around to the shoulder line here, it's difficult for him to keep his weight off me. He can, but he has to use muscular strength. And he has very little attacks from here, right? So ultimately, I don't need to end up in a guard against the bottom player to get to a position where, like I said with the definition, is he doesn't have a guard because he cannot keep his weight off me technically, and he basically has very little attack opportunities available to him. So I want you to think about approaching the bottom player from three broad perspectives. We have supine. If Tyler plays supine guard, we want to change the range that we approach the guard. I want you to think of long range, mid-range, short range. And we can broadly use these three ranges to approach how we approach what bottom position they end up in, right? So if Tyler is playing supine, he's playing flat, he's playing this reactive, wants us to engage type of position here, right? The range we want to use is long range. And by long range, I mean a range that I can touch him, but he can't grip me. If I was mid or short range would ultimately be close contact here. If I'm close contact here, Tyler can establish a guard. Really, even mid-range, he might not be able to establish a guard, but he could grab my ankle. He could get some sort of grip here. So if you're approaching a supine guard, approach it from long range. Give them nothing approach. If you momentarily fuck up the range and he grabs an ankle, strip that straight away. We want to give them absolutely nothing here. If we give them nothing, obviously they'll get nothing, but they won't be able to establish a guard. The other factor I want to talk about is risk. And in terms of risk, I mean risk of submission. The path, the time it takes to go from the position straight to the submission, or ultimately a really bad position here. A lot of people like to play supine. A lot of flexible guys, a lot of guys that come across on the gi. Because if you look at it, for me to go from passing to submission is pretty unlikely when he plays a guard like this, right? I would have to give him something, right? Obviously, something that would come to mind would be if I was approaching it with a knee cut style and I was able to backstep here and to attack the legs. But really, chances are it's not going to work. This guy's coming across on the gi. Perhaps he has good berimbolos, good awareness. He might be able to counter that. And again, for me to set up the backstep, I have to change range. I have to give him something, and he has to basically make an error. Maybe we go knee cut and we catch it, right? So I want you to think of supine as we don't want to have close range because ultimately we can't go straight to a submission very easily anyway. So we approach supine as a long range guard. Again, we approach supine long range, we give them nothing. Long range defined, can they grab our feet? If they can't grab our feet, but we can grab their feet, our range is correct to approach this guard. Range and risk. His risk is minimal. He can play this guard. If he's got good guard retention, he's just going to hang out here hoping to eventually establish a guard that he can now counterattack and attack you from. Whereas when we change to supine, again, we don't want to approach supine at long range. At long range, this is nothing. And if I'm trying to maintain long range and Tyler's trying to create action, if I'm trying to keep long range, I just visually am stalling here. I'm moving backwards. Again, for ADCC, something like that, we don't want to, if we want to stall, we don't want to be moving backwards. You can't hide, you can't pretend you're not stalling if you're moving away. It'd be the same in wrestling. Tyler's standing up. If I'm walking at Tyler, he's moving back. He's stalling here. Obviously, there's certain guys, IBJJF guys, that are very good at actively stalling, right? To hide their intentions of stalling. But again, for the sake of what we're doing here, if we want to be approaching a supine guard, there's some things we want to do, and that's the first one, is approach it from mid-range. Mid-range, I'm going to be a little closer to him. Close enough to be able to touch the shoulders, touch the legs. Ultimately, we still want to be within a range that he could grab the foot, because that's going to be mid-range here. He can grab an ankle. But we also want to be hand fighting here. So if he's trying to grab the feet, he doesn't necessarily get it here. And you can see I'm matching head height here, because if I was postured up, he could take a shot. And that's one of the dangers of supine guard. Very difficult for Tyler to take a shot from here when we're unattached. But if he sits up and my posture's not good, he can take a pretty good shot out of here. So when we approach a seated guard, we want to approach at mid-range. Again, we don't want to approach short range, because I give him shin on shin. And shin on shin is a guard. He has attacks from there, and his frames are actually meaningful. They can keep my weight off of him, or they can redirect my weight. I apply weight, he places me in, Ashi, single leg X. But also, the risk for Tyler is different. So Tyler has to be more risk averse in this position, right? Because the path to me getting a submission or a really good position is a little more real from here. I'm not saying it's strong, but the risk is there. Obviously, if Tyler were to shoot, he could come straight into a guillotine. We could step and win this inside position and start going for Kimura traps, which could ultimately lead to submission or back attack. And again, even potentially while at mid-range, I could still start attacking the front head. The mohawk's looking fine. So again, he's seated. We approach mid-range. He has sort of a medium level risk. And the third type of bottom is the guy that doesn't want to be there. We all know those types. Typically they come from an MMA or wrestling background where they absolutely do not want to be on bottom. But also, and this might have happened to you in training, you've been so tired that you just don't want to be on bottom anymore. You don't want to be carrying this guy's weight in any way, and you want to just get up. So obviously, when that's the case, I want to close the range. So, and this guy can sort of appear at both seated and supine. If we approach this guy, and we know he has no guard at all, and we recognize which training partners and even which opponents have absolutely no guard, we need to change the range. One of the ways to change the range here is short range. Obviously, if I'm back here, Tyler just stands up. He doesn't even need a frame. If I'm mid-range and Tyler wants to get up, he can take a frame over the shoulder and he can start to get up here. But if we go short range here, if I'm head over head, Tyler's trying to stand up, chances are we're going to counter that. There's things we can do. Takes the frame on my arm. We can drag him, right? If he's MMA or wrestling, he might try to shoot. So we can turn it into a snap or a front head. But again, broadly, we want head over head. And we even want necessarily, if we're here and Tyler starts to shoot, I don't want to, if he looks up a double leg grip it, I don't want to sprawl backwards. So he drops back to his butt. From a position like this, I don't want to do a typical sprawl because it'll actually allow Tyler to get out from under me here. If he shoots, I'm sprawling backwards, difficult. Whereas if we use a short range approach as he goes, we want to get that head over head sort of concept here. So again, if he's trying to get up, we want to be close. We want to be that short range. And as you can see, we're talking about range and risk. Tyler has much, much greater risk here. Much more likely to lead straight into a submission. Because the MMA wrestler type, very likely to total, very likely to 4-point. They have to accept some risk. 4-point or total, get your back taken. Shoot, you end up in a front headlock. Those are submission-orientated positions, and those are positions that can end up very badly, very quick. So generally speaking, MMA fighter, wrestler type, much more likely to do that. Even tired jiu-jitsu guys, they're going to turtle. You get past their guard, they're carrying your weight, they are going to turtle. Or the most common jiu-jitsu response, again, is that hip, that high-swing motion. But again, there's opportunities for drags. There's even opportunities straight into a DAS. So again, that last category is the riskiest category for the active participant in it. But again, we're not approaching it from a guard perspective. Again, if Tyler's supine, there are guards available to him. Reverse De La Riva, De La Riva. And he has submission opportunities, K-guard entries from him. He has a means to attack leg entries from the outside position. Seated, he has guards available to him. Even he can go to submission opportunities. Now, he can go into Ashi, straight into reads and start attacking us here. So there are guards available to him, but it doesn't mean we need to engage them to beat the position. So again, supine, seated, and thirdly, the guy that doesn't want to be there. That guy that doesn't want to be there can be anyone that's tired. It can be an MMA fighter or a wrestler with no guard. It can be a very tired jiu-jitsu guy. Guys that are tired just want to get up. Even if they don't have a wrestling advantage against their opponent, they just think, I get up, I can take a breather. That's what we want to create with this product. This instructional is going to give you the tool set to be able to approach the bottom player in a way that is low risk, in a way that fatigues that guy. We want to turn an outside supine player into a seated guy. We want to turn a seated guy into a guy that just wants to stand up. And every time they change their minds and they go from supine to seated, there's a moment of risk, of great risk. And then again, when they go from seated to trying to stand back up, there's another moment of great risk. We can apply pressure to those three layers and ultimately lead to dominant positions or submissions. And at every point, we're not giving them a guard of any kind. And that's how, ultimately, that's the direction the sport's heading. And that's how, again, it's splintering away from gi in one of many ways. Let's talk about the concept of a forced error and how we could potentially apply this principle to jiu-jitsu, right? So obviously, a forced error would be I make my training partner, my opponent, make a bad decision. That could be technique for technique, right? Or my training partner just goes out and makes a terrible decision for himself, unforced, you know what I mean? A good example of that would be take a shot that's not set up. He takes a shot that's not set up, I see it coming, I counter it. I sprawl out, go behind, guillotine front headlock. That's an unforced error. A forced error in a technical sense would be I back him into a corner in such a way where we set up, a good example would be set up an arm in north-south choke, right? So just to put it in context, right? So we're here, we shelf the arm, we come over the head. I could finish Tyler here, but if I give him a little bit of room to turn over his left shoulder, he comes straight into one of the tightest stances you could set up, right? So like, I'm forcing him to make a bad decision. That's B, giving him enough rope to hang himself with, right? But when we approach the passing style we're doing in this instructional, I want you to think how we could use the concept of forced errors, but in a way that involves fatigue. Everyone's heard that stupid MMA saying, who knows where it came from, you punch a black belt in the head, becomes a brown belt, punch a brown belt in the head, becomes a purple belt. Everyone's heard that saying, but I want you to think about it. What is that saying trying to tell us? And is there a different way we could do that to jiu-jitsu? Obviously, I don't want you to go to your gym and just start punching guys in the head to see if their skill level reduces. But one way we could reduce their skill level is by fatiguing them. When people are tired, they make terrible decisions. They make decisions that they wouldn't ordinarily take. Say you've passed the guy's guard, you've mounted him, maybe you're smothering him, he's starting to panic there. He can, in that moment, make a decision. You'll see a highly technical, advanced guy make a terrible decision. Maybe he's just like, he's had enough, he gives up the arm triangle. Or he just goes, he's safe in a position, but he's getting frustrated, he's tired, and he turns and gives up his back. He doesn't try to do it in any sort of technical way. And I want you to think about how we could do that with our guard passing style, right? So we couldn't do it a forced error in the way I'm talking about if I kept giving Tyler a guard and I was trying to pass it, right? It's hard for me to really apply pressure here because Tyler, again, he's got a guard. These hooks, these grips make it difficult for me. Again, the guard means that he can use technique, he can use body structure to keep weight off me. If his guard relies on muscular endurance, right? So if the only thing preventing the guard pass here is Tyler keeping his knees to his chest or keeping his hands in my arm here, this is a frame, but it's a shitty frame and it's not a guard because in my opinion, he's not using his skeletal system to carry weight, he's using his muscles, right? So if you approach the supine player and we keep consistently getting to positions where he has to carry weight or he has to take a big explosion to get out of there, right? If he has to take a big explosion or he has to carry our weight for long periods of time, he's going to start to get tired. And again, when people get tired, they make bad decisions. So you'll see in some competitions, you'll see the bottom player, a guy that is your atypical classic guard guy. As he starts to get tired, he might, again, want to stand up or he might want to concede something. He might look for a place to rest. And that's a way, and that obviously that would be an error. If a guard guy with no resting is getting pressured so much he wants to stand up, in the process of standing up, something even worse happens to him. He gets his back taken and he gets mat returned. Or say he's about to get his guard passed and he has absolutely no skill set in total or 4-point. He has no ability to get up from there because again, in the gym, maybe he's the best guy in the gym, maybe no one ever puts him there, maybe he doesn't work bad areas. If he goes, oh, I'll turtle, I'll take a bit of a breather, that's a forced error. We're forcing him. We're not just entering his guard and trying to technically pass it. We're applying pressure to the bottom player. We're making him carry our weight. We're making him explode. We're making him burn energy. And we're fine on top. We're using foot-to-foot movement. We're barely even using or expending energy here. And when we get ourselves in positions where we can make him carry our weight, we're just leaning on him. We're applying gravity to him. And he's having to carry that weight every bit of the way. And as he gets tired and he makes errors because he's tired, his brain's not working correctly. He's doing things he doesn't do in the gym when he's full of energy. We are creating forced errors. So again, an unforced error, your opponent, your training partner, just does something stupid out of left field. You'll know those guys. Those guys will go for some crazy thing. It's a high risk, high reward move. They'll go for an Imanari roll out of nowhere. And you know the guys, you're training with them and you just think in your head like, why did you do that? Or you just gave me a gift. You gave me something super easy. We all have training partners like that. And obviously we can all be that guy from time to time. We're trying to keep training interesting. Obviously I'm guilty of that myself. Nogi, Ezekiel, Chuck's going for something embarrassing. But those guys are going for highlight reel moves rather than setting them up with fundamentals and stuff like that. And we've got basically two types of forced errors, I think. The one type where we're applying a technique and we back them into a corner, we give them a dilemma. They eat the first one or they turn out into a second one. So we've forced them into that second move that ultimately led to submission, dominant position. Or again, I want you to keep thinking of the forced error concept, that we can apply that principle through fatiguing our training partner or our opponent. It's the reason in gyms, obviously, it's the reason Shark Tanks work so well. You put the best guy in the gym in the center, and he has a fresh opponent every 2-3 minutes. At the start, he's technical. At the start, he's making great decisions. As he gets more and more tired, worse quality training partners can hang with him, and then ultimately worse quality training partners beat him. They beat him up. That's obviously because he's tired, he's making bad decisions. So I want you to think how you could apply that to the bottom guy while not engaging their guards, or staying out of range of their guards, making them carry weight, making them explode. And again, rethink what scoring is in this context. Because sometimes, and it's a big mistake, is the best scoring positions aren't the best positions to make people carry weight. Sometimes we could pass a guy's guard initially. We could just immediately pass the guard. But then he's full of energy, he's technical, he's making smart decisions in a bad position. Whereas maybe if we just cook him a little longer, we stay standing in north-south, we make him carry the weight. We burn him out before we get to the pass. They're going to make worse decisions when we consolidate the position. Sometimes as well, you'll hit a no-gi toreando, you land in side control, and this super strong jacked guy just benches you, throws you off straight away. I don't want you to look at that as a loss. That's not you losing the pass. In any situation where I've made my training partner, my opponent, use more energy in a single exchange than I've used, I'm winning. We got Street Fighter health bars. We can't expect to just kill a fully energized, fresh opponent immediately every time. You need to be so much better than a guy to be able to do that. When skill levels start to get close to each other, what happens is whoever's more efficient, whoever makes their training partners burn energy more than they burn energy, those are the times where we start to submit guys that are either equal in skill level or even better in skill level. Again, if a guy has no energy, if we're crashing his system, we're making him carry weight, we're making him explode. And again, that might mean you pass his guard and he gets out. Don't go, oh shit, I fucked it up. And don't let that bother you. You've made him explode. He only has a few explosions left. You make him do that 2 or 3 more times. I bet that 4th time he is almost ready to quit or go into a bad position straight away. So we need to apply consistent pressure from top. We're fatiguing him while we're staying safe ourselves, avoiding all guards. And we're going to ultimately destroy their energy. They're going to make these forced errors. But again, this is not an instructional where I'm going to be like, they do this, we do this, they do this, we do this. We counter, we submit. It's going to be more of a conceptual approach to how we punish the guy that wants to be on bottom. The guy that be on bottom concedes the first battle, expecting that unspoken rule that you engage the guard. We can apply pressure to him without engaging the guard. I think this is the direction jiu-jitsu's heading. Historically, we could play guard and have our opponent enter our guard and have mutual exchanges. But I think if we approach their bottom position and give them nothing while fatiguing them, what's going to happen? They're either going to want to stand up, well, therein lies opportunity, or they're not going to want to pull guard anymore. So we can basically bring jiu-jitsu back to its sort of MMA authentic roots where being on bottom is bad. We can do that without strikes. And I think we can do that by a passing style that breaks them down and fatigues them and ultimately brings us back to that quote of, again, punch a black belt in the head, it becomes brown belt, punch a brown belt in the head, it becomes a purple belt. I want you to rethink some of the positions we end up in. So IBJJF obviously set the scoring structure and a lot of other events follow the same scoring structure, and there's nothing wrong with it. But I don't want you to think that you have to be in a point scoring position to be in, I guess, a dominant position, right? So quite often I find that some of the positions that I achieve that are the best positions to not only control my training partners and my opponents, but to fatigue and to create panic. And again, so a panicked person makes irrational decisions. This is the reason why heel hooks were so effective early days. Everyone was terrified. And when you're terrified, you make as terrible a decision as when you're fatigued. If I put Placido or Tyler, Placido, we fired him. If I put him in a heel hook position and he has no experience there, and his coaches forever were like, that's too dangerous, that's the deadliest thing. That's like a kung fu move, maybe. A too deadly a move that they would basically be in that heel hook position, they'd freak out and make a bad decision and get submitted immediately. Sometimes not only would they get submitted, that they'd explode in the wrong direction and break their own leg, which I won't mention names, but a few high-level guys I have heel hooked in competition did that and made the break substantially worse. And even some of my matches we didn't see a big break, but you saw the opponent, even if they didn't tap, something bad happened, obviously, right? So I want you to rethink how you approach the guard, and how I don't want you to always think the end goal is a position that scores points. Because again, the goal of and the purpose of this instructional is to approach the bottom player in such a way that we can create enough fatigue, enough stress that they start making bad decisions. And sometimes if I pass the side control immediately, I pass the mount immediately. And this happens very commonly. Guys will have great passing. They'll mount a guy with a good kipping escape. That guy's kipping escape is so technically proficient, they're out of there without even burning any energy. The bottom guy maybe even didn't defend the pass that hard because he was so confident in his escapes. So that would be an example that would go, basically, it'd follow the historic sort of norms of the sport, is that the ultimate goal is to score points in the positions defined by the IBJJF. And those positions historically scored points because they were the best submission achieving positions. Obviously, the back is the best position to end up in, right? That's the best position to get a strangle with minimal risk for yourself. But again, if guys are very good at escapes, very good at submission defense, it's going to be tough to submit those guys. But if we can break them along the way through fatigue, and again, through making them panic, we will make them make mistakes, make them make those forced errors that will ultimately lead to a submission down the road, or again, potentially lead to a submission in the interim. So to give you an example, when people think of escapes, they think of an escape instructional product. What do they think of? Obviously submission escapes, not going to argue with that, but they think of position escapes. People, you ask any coach around the world, how do I escape side control? How do I escape mount? How do I escape back control? They're going to give you an answer. It's going to be a very step-by-step, they do this, I do this approach. I want you to rethink that. And that's something I've seen guys in MMA exploit. Tyler actually brought up this example previous, right? BJ Penn, when he used to fight, sometimes he'd get elevated on butterfly hooks and he would land in a position people would call the dope mount. Obviously, if you did this position incorrectly, I'm just giving Tyler a leg lock, yeah? Yeah, back in those days, BJ didn't have to worry about that. But again, done correctly, we can still use this position safely. And what I like about this position is because we're in a gray area. Tyler, he knows my objective from here is to pass, basically pass straight to mount. So he knows what's coming and he will panic about it. There's no in-between sort of spot here. He knows exactly what's coming next. Very easy for me to pass out of this position. But it's also very easy for me to make Tyler carry weight and make him very uncomfortable, right? You can see Tyler's lower half is pointing to his right. If Tyler's upper body is pointing to his right, he's perfectly fine here. So obviously I'm going to make this very uncomfortable for Tyler. But if I can get weight on top, I can start lifting with this tricep, or I can get a crossface and pull his head in. We can start applying pressure here. And when Tyler's uncomfortable, what's he going to do? He's going to want to get out of there. And if he's in a weight-bearing position and he's trying to explode out of there, he's trying to get out of it, he's going to explode because he's panicking. He's in a bad spot. it's hard for him to remain. It's hard for him to put himself in this position in a way that doesn't cause stress to his body. So if it's hurting him, or if he thinks it's going to hurt him worse, he's more likely to explode. Compare here, if I took side control on Tyler, Tyler immediately knows how to apply frames, even if he doesn't escape. Obviously, if Tyler's arms are far away from his body and I put weight on him, it's going to hurt. If he keeps his elbows tight, I'm not hurting him. I'm not making him make a rush decision. The point structure could make him make a rush decision. In a situation like this, it's an unorthodox position for Tyler. Tyler would rarely get put here. I know for a fact Tyler gets his guard passed 100 times a day. He's used to being in side control bottom. However, a position like this, it's not something he usually deals with. And it's very hard for him to not allow me to put weight in here. You can already see, he's already stressing, he's already panicking. He wants to get out of the position. And if we can make someone panic, we can make him fatigue. And ultimately we can make him make bad decisions down the line. We want to cook the submission. We see the submission in the end. The submission results from a bad decision from them. But if we fatigue him, we make him panic, we stress him out, we can make him make bad decisions. Again, if they're in pain, they're going to aggressively escape. Or if they're fearing something, they're going to aggressively escape. Aggressive escapes are explosions. A person only has so many explosions. Again, that also depends on the performance-enhancing drugs they've been taking lately, to how many explosions they have, right? But again, here, I could pass at any moment. It's very easy for me to put my left foot to mount and then mount with the right. But if I hear Tyler panic and breathing heavy, I'll just cook him here for a while. Another example that would not be a point scoring position would be basically, let's point it this way, positions where we've got this sort of low mount here, where I haven't scored a mount, but Tyler's trying to prevent me from coming up. We're in the in-between position here. We're basically leg riding, Khabib style, right? So another gray area. It's an area of excellent control that's close to submissions, that we can make him carry weight. It's also a great pinning position, and when Tyler's pinned like this, and he's trying to move and he can't, if he's trying to move and he can't, he's doing these gentle movements, and then he starts to move more aggressively. So in a position like this, if Tyler's panicking, those movements are going to get bigger and bigger. So we're in this in-between position where it's not a point scoring position, but it's a position that we can make him carry weight. He doesn't have a guard. He doesn't have submission opportunities. All he can do is really wiggle. And again, there might be technical answers to escape the positions, but because they're unorthodox, because they're hard to find that knowledge is out there, but not everyone is looking for it because they don't get put in these positions. Another great example would be what I would call leg riding, right? So say Tyler is on his side here. I can start to staple his legs here. So I'm keeping his top leg above, and we're just keeping our hips heavy here. Tyler's trying to wiggle out. Very tough for him here, right? Obviously, sometimes the leg ride, his legs will be together here. This is good. It's not as good though, right? Because Tyler, watch this, if he freaks out, I can hang on for a bit, he's gonna get his frames back in. If when we leg ride, we can split the legs. Ultimately, I could keep Tyler here as long as I wanted. When the legs are split in such a way, obviously it's difficult for him to place his toes on the ground and use this in any meaningful way. So again, here we are, position that's not scored, but it also is as great or greater in effectiveness to some of these other standard positions. Again, what person has ever learned how to escape technically and efficiently a position like this? So another position where Tyler's carrying my weight, he's panicking here, he's trying to move. Let's say, for example, he absolutely freaks out, explodes. He's burned more energy than me, or you can see there, he's exposed his back. So we're creating forced areas. So again, don't just seek that traditional enter a guard, pass a guard to a point scoring position, look for a submission or hold on. I want you to think about unique ways you can control the bottom person that don't involve your IBJJF point scoring positions or your standard enter a guard, pass a guard style. I want you to try to be creative here. How do we control the guy bottom? How do we put him in positions he's uncomfortable with, he doesn't get put in often, and how do we put him in positions he doesn't have efficient escapes? Good, I try to say everyone, but I mean, that's not the reality, but everyone should have an efficient side control escape. What do I mean by efficient? You can escape without having to burn a ton of energy. Everyone should have an efficient mount escape. Everyone should have an efficient back escape. Again, at the highest level, they should have that. A lot of guys don't because they don't work. A lot of guys don't because they're the best guy in the gym. They don't work bad positions. That's the reality of it. So again, that's still, going to those positions is still going to be effective. But if we largely as a whole look to put people in these in-between positions to cook them and make them panic, I can safely say that a ton less high-level competitors or your training partners will have efficient escapes for these unorthodox spots than they would for those traditional spots. Because again, there's nothing more frustrating than passing a guy's guard and he gets out easily with no difficulty at all. A classic example, guys without leg lock defense pass the mount, they get kicked into a leg lock. It's like, no, it's like this, something doesn't compute. You're like, no, I'm better than them. I passed the guard straight into a submission. So again, put them in positions they don't have efficient escapes. That's going to put basically money in the bank that down the line, the submission will ultimately be easier. All right, so we're going to talk about a concept called the hip pocket, right? And don't think about this as a pinning position. It's not something that you're going to put someone in and they just cannot move. It's sort of a little goal that's going to make it difficult for them to invert, difficult for them to attack the legs. And ultimately, it could lead to a dominant position. But again, it's going to force them to make big reactions, right? So let's look at it with our legs first, because we can do it with our legs and our upper body, right? So best way to think about it with, in terms of our outside foot is, if we were in a standard ashi, single legs, here I feel, obviously depending on who's on the bottom there, I feel in danger, right? But if we clear these, their hips hit the floor, I step and I pivot out here, I feel very safe here against Tyler. Very difficult for Tyler to do anything here. And you can see my foot is basically in his left pocket here. If I'm standing back, if I straighten my leg, Tyler can lift his hips. Obviously, you have to overpower my hands. But again, when it's slippery, I lose a grip, Tyler lifts his hips. And then he could potentially engage leg attacks, right? But if we land in this hip pocket here, and I just extend my knee a little, try to lift your hips, even without my hands, it's tough, right? So when we clear this pocket here, when we land in this hip pocket, we want to bring our knee forward. So it's easiest to demonstrate from the single X sort of ashi escape. But really, there's nothing to say I couldn't just step into it here. Try to elevate. You can see he's not completely pinned. His upper body's free to move, but it's hard for him to lift the hips. That's because I'm controlling this hip pocket and applying force down through the legs. That makes it hard for him to invert. So again, a good strategy for guys with excellent inversions, a way to negate some of the challenges of approaching guards like that. But again, we don't need to just do it with that outside foot. The first one is the outside foot. We can also do it with the inside foot here. So I could front pummel inside. Tyler tries to lift his hips. We keep that knee in. But again, it's one of those things, right, where if I'm scared of the legs, so I think bring my body away, it actually allows Tyler to invert. And he can attack us here. As we come back, I want to overcommit. So rather than lean back, lean in. Tyler tries to invert. He might ultimately force us to step back, but we've made him panic along the way. So again, we could step into the hip pocket with the outside foot. We could front pummel inside. And as long as we bend that knee, Tyler's attacking. Very doable. You see, he can attack that leg, but he's really, as long as he can't get his legs in that direction, it's going to be tough for him to do anything meaningful with it. But we can do it with our lower body, we can do it with our upper body. We're going to get into this in more detail. If you saw the Z-Guard product, you got a little bit of a taste of it from that, but we can actually do it out of a weave too. So if I clear my legs here, Tyler's trying to invert, you can see my hand in that hip pocket is immobilizing him here, making it difficult to move. It doesn't even have to be between the legs. Sometimes if I'm here, Tyler's trying to lift his hips, very, very tough here. So it's one of those points of contact that is applying pressure towards the legs. And again, following that principle of making it difficult for Tyler to bring his knees to his chest here. We need to get in this space, right? But if Tyler wants to invert, he has to bring his knees to his chest, then lift his hips. So obviously if we can prevent knee to chest contact, we can prevent inversions. We don't just need to do it in this direction either. If Tyler's head is facing me and he's bringing his legs in, I could seek the hip pocket at any point. Tyler tries to invert. Very difficult here. And the hip pocket also turns into a drag. Let's say our pressure is incorrect. Tyler starts to turn. If I'm not careful, he could triangle me. So we come back. If I do lose his ability to stop the inversion, it becomes a drag. We can use it as a hip drag. Now we're not really in danger at all. And I've used his momentum to pull his leg fast. So again, when we're seeking the hip pocket, we either prevent the inversion, or if he goes to invert, turn it into a drag. So again, we've got those points of contact that make it difficult to invert. It makes it difficult to invert because it makes knee to chest contact difficult. So we've got the outside, step in, knee forward. We've got the front pummel style, step in, knee forward. We can use our hand inside. We can even use our hand outside as we bring weight forward. So a little concept I call the hip pocket. We can control the hip pocket. We can mitigate some of the risks of inversions and leg attacks.